Welcome back to our Fireside Chat part. David, Yogi Berra once said it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future.
Oh, he was a funny little man, wasn't he?
Yeah, good coach, too. But I have to say, I think we did pretty well. Our first Fireside Chats were recorded in October of 2022.
Yep.
And back then, we warned viewers, and in particular CEOs of companies with large sets of sensitive data, i.e. most all companies, of potential quantum decryption threats, snatching decrypt hacking by China and other adversaries, and of imminent action by the United States and other governments to combat these threats.
We did pretty good.
In the few short months since our first round of chats came out, a bunch of things have happened. First, Congress passed, and on December 22nd, 2022, the president signed the Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, which will be a key part of this set of Fireside Chats. You have it right there?
I hold in my hand this Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act.
Now, for those of you watching at home, if we had a larger special effects budget, we would have this on parchment.
All right.
And if you want to read along with us at home, I encourage you to pause this, go get some parchment, copy the thing down, and you can read along with us.
Because no level of nerdiness and wonkiness is too much.
It's not beyond us. No. Nope.
Right.
Also, just to pull back the kimono a little bit, when we recorded our last Fireside Chat, it was October here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
It was about 90 degrees. And I hope you didn't notice, but we were hot, very hot with the fire on. But now it's a pleasant.
We've made adjustments.
Now I've turned the room into a virtual meat locker, veritable meat locker. So we're not so
much
hot.
better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Second thing that's happened, which we'll discuss since we last got together, was a bunch of Chinese researchers released a paper claiming that they had the ability theoretically to create a quantum computer that could break RSA encryption.
Oh boy, is that scary, isn't it?
It is, and we will talk in great deal detail.
Even if they can't break it, it's an amazing thought experiment, as Dr. Johnson said. It sort of concentrates the mind.
Yeah, like a hanging.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the future is coming at us faster than I think anyone can expect, and for sure the government has to assume that that's the case. Whether or not this paper is mathematically and scientifically correct, whether or not China is doing a whole bunch more behind the scenes that aren't in the paper, which I'm sure there are, the threat is coming. But first, before we get to all of that, as we sit here...
first, cut the yellow wire.
Yeah.
Anybody watching MASH out there? Okay, I'm dating myself.
Step 5, put your head between your legs and kiss yourself goodbye. Yeah. Before we get to that, as we're recording this here in late January of 2023, President Biden is about to unveil his new national cybersecurity strategy. And before it comes out, I thought we'd do a little thought experiment.
Why don't we do that?
To say what we think is going to be in it and what we think should be in it that may not be in it. But first, David, I was actually privileged enough to be involved in drafting the first ever U.S. national strategy to secure cyberspace.
Oh my goodness!
Back in 2002, 2003.
May I touch you?
It's just a thing. I have so little to be proud of. But one thing I actually was very proud of is when President Obama came out in your administration, in which you served as Assistant Attorney General. And by the way, everybody, if you want to look up our bios, go back. You'll have to watch our first Fireside Chat again, just so we can get a few more eyeballs.
And what a reward that will be for you.
Yes. Have a stiff drink if you want to do it. But when President Obama's strategy came out, I'm proud to say it was, 70-80% the same as Bush's.
Yeah, no,
and they didn't agree on anything, right? I'm very proud of that, actually.
How times have changed, really. Think what we've all been through.
Yeah, I could go into my grumpy old man from Saturday Night Live routine. My day, we didn't even have feet. We walked around on stumps. Enough of that.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you put the national cybersecurity strategy, though, into a little bit of context of government strategy?
There's all kinds of strategy in the government, right? And some of them are published. There's a defense strategy. There's a national security overall strategy. There's a cybersecurity strategy. There's also a wonderful annual, or at least it's supposed to be annual, threat assessment, which if you are feeling optimistic and like to bring your mood down a bit, you want to know all the bad stuff that might happen, you can read that document. It's taken very, very seriously by the IC. All these documents are taken really quite seriously. And when you read them, as I have had occasion to do, you can chart the progression, the sort of ups and downs of U.S. national security strategy over time. They're not, perfect. They don't align absolutely with what is thought to be happening or what is going to actually happen, of course, because no plan survives first contact with reality. But they are still instructive. A lot of work typically goes into them, and they do tell you something, whether viewed, prospectively or retrospectively.
And as we mentioned last time, they suck up a tremendous amount of energy. So no administration is going to waste a lot of time on something that they do not believe is important.
Yeah.
And so with that preamble, let me just, I'll go first. Let me talk about what I think may be in the strategy. I think a first big change, or at least evolution over past strategies, is they will talk about more of a whole of the nation approach than just a whole of government approach. Now, there's only so much a president and even a Congress and a president can do on the national level, but I think they're going to make the point that this really has to be more involvement by the private sector than has been in the past at protecting the country against cyber threats. And to that end, this is not my clairvoyance. This is statements by U.S. government officials at the recent CES conference I was at, that it is going to do something I think is pretty new, which is try to place the burden and the expense of cybersecurity defense on the institutions in the country that can most afford it and are most in a position to actually carry it out. So expect a lot more emphasis on critical infrastructure providers, expect a lot more emphasis on cloud storage companies, and expect a push for more mandatory regulations as opposed to guidelines.
The Smarty Pants conventional wisdom is long focused on public-private partnerships, and indeed considerable intellectual energy has been spent on trying to relabel those partnerships as something else. But regardless, it is really clear, because the private sector owns so much of the critical infrastructure, including communications infrastructure, is so quick in innovating, is so important in the security and cybersecurity markets, that there just has to be stronger partnerships. But I got to say, I think, as Chris Inglis testified when he was in his confirmation hearing for National Cyber Director, I mean, you want to appeal to enlightened self-interest, you want to create market incentives, but if you can't get the thing far enough down the field with those kinds of measures, you've got to possibly go to a push to something more mandatory. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them moving in that direction at this stage of things.
Yeah, and my sense is that the Office of National Cyber Director in the White House, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, National Security Council, all have had a pretty significant role in crafting this. So I would expect it to reflect his views. And indeed, I think there's, putting on my private general counsel hat, I think there's a consensus really, even among a lot of businesses, that we can't do this voluntarily. And that even though they, as a knee-jerk reaction, hate regulation, one, they'd rather have uniform federal regulation in 50 states, but also it's just, there's too much free riding, and they have to have it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing about, I grant you, private sector generally doesn't smile on government regulation and generally thinks the government is stupid and so forth and so on, and all of the tropes and cliches we're used to. But the point you just made is worth emphasizing, and that is, if you set regulatory standards, it becomes the floor for everybody. And so then there's no competitive advantage in trying to, weasel out of it. It's like, airbags or seatbelts. If everybody's got to do it, then whatever the expense is, at least is uniform. I mean, look, that's an oversimplified approach to market dynamics and regulatory dynamics, and I don't want to get into
Put your pens down, economists.
Right, exactly. But I can understand why, secretly a lot of these people, apart from their sense of the public good, but a lot of private sector folks might say, yeah. And, a lot of big private sector entities have called for, in the tech space, have called for legislative or regulatory standards in certain areas. Now, they may be doing that where they think it's particularly, useful to them and their competitive posture. But the idea is not as far-fetched as it might seem to be.
And I also think there's a certain, get on the train or be run over by it mentality that this is going to happen now and we better support it and try to influence it in the best way we can. So that's things one and two for me. Thing three is I think there's going to be a great deal more emphasis on offensive U.S. government cybersecurity operations, not just defensive. And, ever since at least the Clinton administration, there's been some public discussion about offensive cyber activities. And, we've even sort of hinted that we've done some. But I think this is really going to become a focus that we as a country not only need to detect and prevent cyber attacks, we need to identify, disrupt, and destroy the networks overseas that conduct these attacks. And I think that's coming.
The three Ds, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy, are overcome only by the 4 or 5 Fs, right? The old find, fix, and finish little number. So for old CT guys like us,
counterterrorism,
right? They're starting to bring in the heavy duty vocabulary here. Yeah, I mean, I think that does seem like Cyber Command in particular has been obviously increasingly aggressive and increasingly transparent about how aggressive they have been in dealing with a lot of things. They've done a lot of open discussions about cooperation with U.S. providers as well vis-a-vis Ukraine. I think I'll be looking for, maybe you have insight, of course, by the way, when this comes out, the actual strategy may be already, in the public domain.
When you see this, we're
going to be embarrassed
right at that point.
And, wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah.
But,
on both counts.
There is some interest in certain parts of the private sector in letting loose, like letters of marque or something like that, and letting them hack back. That has always struck me as very, very complicated and quite a bit different than letting Cyber Command or even the FBI go to town through some kind of federal process. And I wondered, is there any indication that private sector actors are going to be given more leeway?
Well, first of all, you just disclosed my top secret plans for my screenplay called Marque, M-A-R-Q-U-E, where a bunch of daytime hackers get dragooned by the government under a secret order to work for them.
You heard it here first, Hollywood.
Yeah. If you can see this, that's a circle with a C in the middle of it. So thanks for that. This, wearing all the different hats that we've both worn over the last 20 years, we've been in the government, we've been general counsels, we've, been cyber consultants and lawyers. I do think within the next 10 years, there is going to have to be some U.S. legislation that reduces the penalties or lowers the risk of private sector companies being able to quote unquote hack back. Now, I'm not talking about going out and, destroying the servers of another country. Right. But by God, right now under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, there are lawyers who say you can't even put a little bit of code to detect where your data ended up.
So,
I think that's going to get loosened up.
Okay, I think there may be some loosening, but I would say I'm relatively skeptical that it'll happen. Put aside the normative question whether it should.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's so much complexity that progress towards more openness there is going to be slow. I can imagine a little bit of leeway in identifying and letting you identify attackers, but I'm not sure they're going to turn them loose.
And there was a draft.
Maybe they'll have some kind of like National Guard where Mandiant gets drafted. That I can see,
Hey, listen, and all kidding aside,
there's a lot of public-private partnerships that the adversaries pursue.
Kidding aside, the provisions of the Constitution we were talking about authorizing the issuance of so-called letters of marque and reprisal, where a pirate becomes a privateer overnight, still on the books.
Okay.
No reason they couldn't be used. No reason to know that they had never been used. They could be issued in secret.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know. All of our constitutional lawyer friends will tease us about that.
People are now screaming and crying. Yeah, but really, there's a great movie here.
Yeah. Don't use that. I'm going to work on it.